Over the last few years I've noticed something interesting at Wargame shows and events. The crowds seem different. Not smaller, not less enthusiastic, but broader. More women, more younger people, more families, and more people from backgrounds that perhaps weren't traditionally associated with historical wargaming. So today I want to explore a simple question. Is a more diverse hobby actually good for historical wargaming, and what might that mean for its future? And this is one of those topics I've tried to make a video about several times, and every time I sit down to write it I find myself wondering whether I'm about to open a can of worms like the blue touch paper under a controversy, or simply say something that most people already agree with. Conversations about diversity can sometimes become, surprisingly heated, even in hobbies that are fundamentally about having fun, learning new things and spending time with like-minded people. Now, the reason I wanted to tackle it now is because over the last few shows I've attended, I've noticed some genuine changes in the makeup of the crowd, and those changes left me feeling very optimistic about the future of historical wargaming. Now, at recent events that I've attended, I've noticed that there seems to be noticeably more women attending as visitors and participants. There's a much stronger mix of ages than I remember seeing, say 20 or 30 years ago. The South London Warlords, for example, market their event Salute as being 100% family friendly, and that certainly seemed reflected in the number of parents, children and family groups moving around the halls. What struck me most, however, was not simply that the crowd looked different, it was the atmosphere. The overall feeling was vibrant and energetic and overwhelmingly positive, and that vibe has been echoed in other shows I've attended this year as well. Now, the general impression I got from many conversations is that the hobby is definitely in safe hands. Now, I've been involved in tabletop gaming of one type or another for more than 40 years, and during that time I've played role-playing games, fantasy battles, historical campaigns, skirmish games, naval actions and enough tabletop wars to qualify as a megalomaniac. And this hobby has taught me history, introduced me to lifelong friends, given me countless hours of enjoyment. Yet, if I'm being honest, for much of that time the historical wargaming scene generally looked very similar to, well, me. Most participants were middle-aged, white and male. And that's not a criticism, it's simply an observation based on decades of attending clubs, conventions and shows. And what's become increasingly obvious to me over the last decade is that the hobby is gradually becoming bit more broader in its makeup. More people from different backgrounds are finding their way into wargaming, and importantly they seem comfortable enough to stay. Now, personally I think that's a very, very positive development. Now, before we go any further, because I know what's going to happen in the comments, I want to be absolutely clear what I'm not saying. I'm not suggesting anyone should abandon their favourite periods, their favourite armies or their styles of gaming. I'm not arguing for quotas or politics to take over the hobby, and I'm certainly not suggesting that historical accuracy should be compromised. But my point is much simpler than that. When more people discover the hobby and decide they enjoy it, then it's generally a good thing. More players mean more clubs, and more games, more events, more ideas, and ultimately a healthier future for the hobby. For me, the evidence is right there in the halls of the shows that I've attended over the last year or two or more. Now, one thing that fascinates me is how different the route into the hobby has become. Now, when I started, historical wargaming often felt like a fairly niche pursuit. You usually found it through a local club, a specialist magazine, or by knowing somebody already involved. Today people arrive from all sorts of directions. Some come through board gaming, some through role-playing games and others through science fiction and fantasy miniatures. Many discover the hobby through YouTube videos, podcasts, social media, or simply because they decide to visit a local event to see what all the fuss is about. The destination may be the same, but the roads leading there are far more varied than they used to be, and I suspect that this is one of those reasons why we're seeing a broader range of people participating in the hobby now. Now, of course, whenever the word diversity comes up as a topic, somebody inevitably worries that the hobby is becoming politicised. And I understand that concern, because most of us come to wargaming to relax, learn something interesting and spend time with friends. But when I look at what I've actually observed at shows, that's not what I see happening. What I see is people discovering a hobby that they enjoy. I see parents introducing their children to miniature gaming, younger gamers finding historical periods that capture their imagination, and people who perhaps wouldn't have considered historical wargaming 20 years ago now feeling comfortable enough to get involved. That doesn't feel political to me, it's simply people enjoying a hobby. It feels like real hobby growth. And from where I'm standing, that's exactly what a healthy hobby should look like. Another concern that I occasionally hear is that widening participation somehow means rewriting history or moving away from traditional subjects. And again, that hasn't been my experience. If anything, I've found the opposite. One of the most enjoyable aspects of meeting newer hobbyists is discovering historical subjects that might never have explored myself. Every gamer brings their own interests and curiosity. Sometimes that leads to fascinating discussions about obscure campaigns, forgotten armies, overlooked theatres of war, or historical figures who rarely appear in mainstream books. The more people who participate, the more ideas get brought to the table, and that's something I've always loved about our community. At its best, this hobby is a giant exchange of enthusiasm. One person becomes fascinated by a campaign, paints an army, builds some terrain, and then shares that enthusiasm with everybody else. The rest of us learn something new as a result. A broader range of people naturally means a broader range of interests, and that seems like an opportunity rather than a threat. History is far broader than any one period, nation or campaign, and every new enthusiast has the potential to shine a light on a corner of it that the rest of us may have overlooked. Now, one thing I've learned after 40 years in the hobby is that most wargamers genuinely want to share what they love. Sometimes we can accidentally make the hobby look more intimidating than it really is. We start talking about obscure campaigns, army organisations and rules interactions as if everybody already knows what they're discussing. And I know I've probably done it myself. But when I look at the hobby, when I look at the people entering the hobby today, what strikes me is how quickly that barrier disappears once somebody gets invited to roll some dice. Most of us are probably just one good participation game away from becoming lifelong wargamers. That's certainly how many of the people that I know started, and I suspect it's how many people will continue to discover the hobby in the future. There's also a practical reality that shouldn't be ignored. Every hobby needs new participants. If it wants to remain healthy, clubs need members, events need visitors, manufacturers need customers, rules writers need players, content creators need audiences. Without new people entering the hobby, eventually everything starts shrinking. And that's why the atmosphere at recent shows has left me feeling very optimistic. The crowds aren't shrinking. They're getting bigger and they're evolving. The games people are playing may be changing too. We might be seeing more skirmish games, more narrative campaigns and more crossover between different branches of tabletop gaming than we did 20 or 30 years ago. There may be fewer giant refights of Waterloo stretching across 3 village halls, but they're not gone entirely. But the enthusiasm, the creativity and passion for history are all still there. In fact, I would argue that they are stronger than ever. Some of the most interesting conversations I've had recently have been with people who've joined the hobby within the last few years. They often approach familiar subjects from unexpected angles. They ask questions that long-time gamers may never have considered and bring fresh energy without necessarily rejecting the traditions that attracted many of us in the first place. It's one of the reasons I find these changes encouraging rather than worrying. The hobby doesn't have to choose between tradition and growth. We can keep the things we love whilst welcoming people who may discover different things and a different way to enjoy the hobby. Now for me, the core of this discussion is surprisingly simple. I want historical wargaming to be around for another 40 years. I want future generations to discover the same enjoyment, friendships, creativity and learning opportunities that this hobby has given to me. When I walk around shows today, I see plenty of reasons to believe that will happen because I see families attending together, younger gamers getting involved and people from a wider range of backgrounds discovering the hobby and making it their own. Most importantly, I see endless enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is the fuel that keeps hobbies alive. Ultimately, I don't think diversity is a threat to historical wargaming. I think it's a sign that the hobby is healthy, adaptable and capable of attracting new generations of enthusiasts. From where I'm standing, after more than 4 decades in the hobby, that's something worth celebrating. The hobby still has all of the things many of us love. History, craftsmanship, research, camaraderie and the simple pleasure of rolling dice with friends. The difference is that more people are being invited to enjoy those things as well. So what do you think? Have you noticed changes in the makeup of the crowds at shows and clubs over the last few years? Do you think a more diverse hobby community benefits historical wargaming? Or do you see challenges that need to be addressed? I genuinely love to hear your thoughts, experiences and observations in the comments below. So that's it for this week. Please join the chat in the comments and don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell for your weekly fix. Until next week, stay safe, keep gaming and keep rolling high. Let's do that paragraph again, because apparently I can't even read my own writing.